Welcome, everyone, to today's discussion. We're exploring the future of a society rooted in Judeo-Christian moral principles, the impact of significant orthodox Islamic immigration, and how this intersects with individual freedom versus societal mandates viewed through socialist and capitalist perspectives. Let's begin with opening thoughts. Charles, please start.
Thank you. I believe the Judeo-Christian moral framework, emphasizing love, charity, and the sanctity of the individual, has been the bedrock of Western society's stability and progress. These principles, rooted in Scripture, promote a balance between personal responsibility and communal care. The influx of orthodox Islamic immigrants who may adhere to a different moral and legal system like Sharia raises concerns about compatibility. While I respect their right to faith, I worry that imposing Islamic orthodoxy could erode the individual freedoms we cherish, like freedom of speech or conscience, which are divinely inspired in my view. A society must cohere around shared values, and I'm skeptical that mass immigration without assimilation can achieve that.
Charles, I disagree that Judeo-Christian morals are uniquely essential. Morality evolves through reason and human experience, not divine mandate. Western society's strength lies in its secular adaptability, freedom of thought, skepticism, and individual rights, which don't require religion. Orthodox Islamic immigration could challenge this, sure, but the real issue isn't their faith, it's whether any group, religious or not, imposes rigid dogma. I'm more concerned about the ruling class, whether socialist or capitalist, using immigration as a wedge to control populations. Socialism's push for collective welfare can stifle individual freedom, but capitalism's profit motive often does the same by prioritizing corporate interests over people. Both can exploit cultural tensions to justify control.
Lucian, you're right to flag control, but let's not dodge the immigration question. As a believer, I see Judeo-Christian values like compassion and justice as guiding our politics. But I'm also pragmatic. Mass immigration of Orthodox Muslims, who may prioritize religious law over secular governance, risks fracturing our social contract. My faith calls me to welcome the stranger, but politically I see unchecked immigration straining welfare systems and public safety. From a socialist lens, I'd argue for managed integration to preserve social cohesion and resources for all citizens. Capitalist approaches, which often exploit cheap labor, ignore these long-term costs. The ruling class, whether left or right, must prioritize citizens' freedoms over ideological experiments.
I approach this from a data-driven perspective. Judeo-Christian morals, Islamic orthodoxy, or any belief system must be evaluated by their measurable impact on society. Studies show diverse societies can thrive with integration. Look at Canada's immigration model, with a 22% foreign-born population, yet stable social metrics. But high volumes of Orthodox immigrants, if unintegrated, correlate with social friction, as seen in parts of Europe with higher crime rates or cultural enclaves. Science doesn't care about your beliefs, it cares about outcomes. On freedom versus control, socialism's centralized planning often reduces efficiency. Look at Venezuela's economic collapse. But capitalism's deregulation can destabilize too, like the 2008 financial crisis. The question is what system best balances individual autonomy with societal stability, regardless of who's immigrating.
Albert, your data is useful, but you're sidestepping the spiritual dimension. Judeo-Christian principles aren't just rules. They're a worldview that fosters trust and mutual respect. Orthodox Islam, in its stricter forms, often demands submission over individual choice, which clashes with Western freedoms. For example, in some Islamic majority countries, apostasy laws carry severe penalties. If those values dominate here, our tradition of free inquiry, rooted in Christian ideas of conscience, could erode. On the socialism-capitalism point, I lean capitalism because it aligns with personal responsibility, a biblical virtue. Socialism's forced redistribution feels like state overreach, undermining the individual's God-given agency.
Charles, you're romanticizing Judeo-Christianity. The Inquisition wasn't exactly a beacon of free inquiry. All religions, including Islam, can be dogmatic. The real threat isn't immigrants, it's any ideology, religious or secular, imposed by force. Look at history. Socialist regimes like the USSR crushed dissent, but capitalist systems like the US have their own controls. Think surveillance post 9/11, justified by security. On immigration, I'd argue for secular integration. If Orthodox Muslims or anyone can't accept pluralist values, that's a problem. But blaming Islam as a monolith is lazy. It's like blaming all Christians for Westboro Baptist. The solution is enforcing a neutral, reason-based social contract, not picking a religious team.
Lucian, your secular utopia sounds nice, but people aren't robots. Faith and culture shape behavior, and pretending otherwise ignores reality. As a believer, I think Judeo-Christian values offer a moral compass that's proven durable. But politically, I see the risk of Orthodox Islamic immigration overwhelming systems like healthcare or housing, which we've built to reflect our values of collective care. A socialist principle, I'd argue. In Sweden, for instance, high immigration has strained welfare budgets, with 20% of public spending going to immigrant integration. Capitalist systems might absorb labor, but often leave social costs unaddressed, creating resentment. We need strong borders and immigration policies to protect individual freedoms while ensuring societal benefits don't collapse under pressure.
Ingrid, your numbers align with data from the OECD. High immigration can strain welfare states without careful management. But let's avoid emotional appeals. The question is empirical. Can a society maintain its core principles while integrating diverse populations? Evidence from the U.S. shows immigrants often adopt local values within a generation, but only with strong education and economic incentives. Orthodox Islam, like any rigid ideology, can resist this if insularity is encouraged. Look at parallel communities in parts of France. On freedom versus control, socialism's high taxes can reduce personal incentives, as seen in Nordic models with 50% plus tax rates. But capitalism's inequality, top 1% owning 32% of U.S. wealth, fuels division too. Both systems risk elite control. The data doesn't favor either outright.
Albert, your stats are compelling, but they miss the deeper issue: meaning. Judeo-Christian values give people a shared purpose, something Islam's emphasis on submission might not align with in a Western context. If immigrants impose practices like mandatory veiling or gender segregation, it challenges our tradition of individual dignity. I'm not saying they can't integrate, but the value matters. A 2016 Pew study projected Europe's Muslim population could hit 10% by 2050 with high migration. That's a cultural shift. On economics, capitalism rewards initiative, reflecting the parable of the talents. Socialism's top-down control, while well-intentioned, often punishes excellence to enforce equality, which feels anti-human to me.
Charles, you're cherry-picking. Judeo-Christian history has its own oppressive moments. Slavery was justified biblically for centuries. Orthodoxy, Islamic or otherwise, only becomes a problem when it's enforced. The solution isn't demonizing immigrants, but ensuring a secular legal framework where no group, Muslim, Christian, or atheist, gets to dictate terms. On the economic front, both systems are flawed. Socialism can breed dependency. Look at Greece's debt crisis. But capitalism's unchecked greed leads to monopolies and wage stagnation. Real wages in the U.S. have barely grown since the 1970s. The ruling class, whether socialist bureaucrats or capitalist elites, loves cultural debates like this to distract from their power grabs.
Lucian, you're cynical, but you're not wrong about distraction. Still, as a believer, I think faith matters. Judeo-Christian principles encourage charity and community, which align with socialist policies like universal healthcare. But I'm not naive. Mass amount of Orthodox Muslims could shift cultural norms, especially if they resist secular laws. In Germany, 47% of Muslim immigrants in a 2018 survey favored religious law over state law in some cases. That's a red flag. Politically, we need controlled immigration to balance compassion with stability. Capitalist systems often dodge accountability, letting corporations profit off cheap labor while taxpayers cover social costs. Freedom means protecting our values, not surrendering them to either elite control or unchecked migration.
Ingrid, that German survey aligns with integration challenges. But let's focus on mechanisms. Successful integration, seen in Australia's point-based immigration system, relies on education, language proficiency, and economic contribution. Cultural values, Judeo-Christian or Islamic, adapt when people are invested in the system. On freedom versus control, socialism's centralization often leads to inefficiency. Look at the UK's NHS wait times, up to 6 months for some procedures. But capitalism's market-driven approach can exclude the vulnerable. 40 million Americans lack health insurance. Both systems can erode freedom if elites manipulate them. Immigration's impact depends on policy design, not moralizing about whose values are better.
Albert, policy design is crucial, but values shape policy. Judeo-Christian ethics prioritize the individual's worth, which supports democratic freedoms. Orthodox Islam's emphasis on collective submission can conflict with that, especially in large numbers. I'm not against immigration, but without shared values, we risk fragmentation. On economics, I see capitalism as more aligned with human nature. People thrive when free to create. Socialism's top-down control often stifles that, like Venezuela's 90% poverty rate despite oil wealth. The ruling class, whatever their ideology, shouldn't dictate moral or economic terms. Faith in God keeps us grounded in something higher.
Charles, your faith is your lens, but it's not universal. Human progress comes from questioning, not blind belief. Orthodox Islam, like any ideology, can be rigid, but so can your Judeo-Christian nostalgia. The real issue is power. Both socialist and capitalist elites use cultural clashes to justify control. Think Patriot Act or EU migration quotas. Immigration only disrupts if we let it. A 2019 study showed that 70% of second-generation Muslims in Europe identify with their host country. The solution is secular education and opportunity, not fear-mongering. Both economic systems fail when they prioritize elites over individuals. Socialism with its bureaucrats, capitalism with its billionaires.
Lucian, I agree elites exploit divisions, but faith and culture aren't just side issues. Judeo-Christian values have shaped our laws. Think equality before the law, rooted in biblical justice. Mass Orthodox Islamic immigration could challenge that if cultural relativism lets illiberal practices slide. Politically, I'd push for a socialist model that balances compassion with accountability. Strong borders, fair welfare, and integration programs. Capitalist systems often dodge accountability, letting corporations profit off cheap labor while taxpayers cover social costs. Freedom means protecting our values, not surrendering them to either elite control or unchecked migration.
Let's wrap with facts. Integration works when policies incentivize it: language, jobs, education. A 2020 study showed integrated immigrants boost GDP in Western nations by 1 to 2%. But high-volume, unmanaged immigration correlates with social strain, like increased crime in specific European cities. On freedom, both socialism and capitalism can erode autonomy if unchecked, centralized control versus corporate monopolies. Judeo-Christian or Islamic values aren't the core issue. It's whether any group imposes their will. Data-driven policy, not ideology, is the path forward. We need systems that maximize individual potential while ensuring societal stability.
Thank you all for a robust exchange. We've heard diverse perspectives, moral, secular, political, and scientific, on a complex issue. There's no single answer, but the arguments highlight the stakes. Listeners, we leave it to you to reflect and decide.